here. So that was that. This is essentially the a URL configuration planner for the planner project, right? So, and essentially what is going to happen is you're going to see URL patterns. And then whenever Django sees a path or URL path that matches this pattern, it's going to execute a function, right? And a function is, we'll get to that later. So essentially it's going to execute this function that returns something to us, right? So this, right, website, and then it's going to execute some function that returns, and what is this function going to do? It's going to show us a web page. Then we could have another web path, right? So it's going to see this about us, and then we say, if you see about us, right, following this homepage, then execute a function that shows us the website's about us page, right, where you show, okay, this is who we are, this is our services and whatnot, right? Then you could have one say, okay, about us and team, then show us the team page within the about us page, right, or go directly to that. And so essentially URL, right, in Django is like, it's kind of something that you can, is a path that you use to execute some certain functions. So you put this as an input, and then a function would execute based on this input, which is essentially what you want to show your user, and then the result will be returned back to the user, right? So a uniform resource locator, I'm getting tongue twisted here, but a URL, like I said, it is essentially an address on the web, right? Every single resource that you see on the web has a URL. As you can see, this is a URL, quite a long one, but this is the resource that I'm using to share with you using Google Slides. And in Django, like I'm saying, this URL maps to a function, right? So based on the mapping, it will return specific results based on the input, right? So these are the routes or addresses of the various pages that we want our application to have. These are the green, essentially URLs, and these pages will be served to our user based on the URLs that they select. So if I select this, I'll get this. If I select that, I'll get this. If I select this, I'll get that. It's not going to happen that I say my website.com and then it should show me now my team page. Then that's when you know something's going wrong here, right? You have incorrectly set up your mapping structure. Oh, yeah. So in Django, the URLs for your application is stored in the conf file, and I showed you that. So URL routes maps URLs to specific actions when the URL is entered by user. So when I enter something here, my website, it returns something to me or does something. Okay, so that is a URL. So now just a quick brief on HTTP requests, because we'll be doing a lot of this. And I just skip that. Okay, yes. So HTTP requests, we're going to go through all this because well, we're working on building a website, a web application, and we have to know some of these HTTP requests. The most common ones so far are the get, post, put, patch, delete. The get essentially is a method that requests a representation of a specific resource. You typically use it for requesting data or retrieving data. So using get should only retrieve the data. You don't want to send data with get, because that would be quite vulnerable. Everybody will see what you're sending. If you want to send something, you use the post method, right? So it submits something to the specified resource, and usually you cause a change in the state or side effects on the server. So you're submitting like an input, and then you would store that input, right? And maybe based on the logic, it will change something, right? And then you have the put, the patch, and the delete requests, right? So just understand these, and as we will be building on them as we go on. So now we go to the views. So what is a view, right? Actions executed for different URLs and HTTP methods, right? So Django views are Python functions or classes, right? That can take a request, right? Remember a request from, yeah, request, and return a response like an HTML document or maybe an action on your server, right? So let's say it's a function and it's a class, like I said, and then there is logic that evaluates the application request and returns a response, right? So a Django web application makes use of views for different tasks and missions. And you should think of like a view as a go-between or a connection between your URL patterns that you defined previously and the business logic that you want to execute before returning something to the user. As mentioned, we have two types of Django views, the function-based views and the class-based views, which are based on object-oriented programming. So if you are not strong on object or OOP, then we also have a video on Python fundamentals. You can watch that, right? So function views, essentially, these are quite straightforward and are written as Python functions. They take in an HTTP request and then return an HTTP response. And so it's the same as class-based views, but they are a bit more complex as they are equipped with different methods to handle different HTTP requests, right? So you have a Django, your data preparation and ingestion. That's what essentially happens in the view. I execute a business logic and I create a response data. Could be HTML, right? So URLs, let's see the logic of the process flow. I, as a user, I enter a URL, and then that sends a request to my server. My server sometimes will communicate to the data storage, sends a, hey, what's happening? I got this request, and you retrieve this, and I send it back to my server, and then my server sends back a response to the user, which could be in the form of a web page. Okay, and that's just the flow of how these would work on the Django, that Django processes your requests. So this is the algorithm that Django uses to determine which Python code to execute, right? So I get a request, my URL conf module should be used to determine this request, what is being requested for, right? So which path or which URL, and then Django loads the Python module and looks for the variables URL patterns that you saw in that Python file, and it matches that pattern in the URLs and defined in the path instances. And then Django does all of this. It goes through each views, and then based on the view that matches the path or the pattern, it returns a response back to the client. All right, so let's get back to our VS Code and do some coding. Okay, so we are back on VS Code, and like we did before, we created a planner project. Now let's start doing some things. This is your manage PY, and essentially this is a Django's command line utility for handling administrative tasks. So we're going to use it quite a lot. I want to start my server, right? My development server. So I'm going to say, hopefully I'm not typing in there. So you don't touch this, right? Unless you know what you're doing. But I still advise don't touch this, right? I know. So Python, and then we say Python manage py, and we say run server, right? It's going to execute a server. And then I'm going to click on it, and hopefully we'll see that we've started a development server on our website. And then there we go. So this is our server, this is our web page. All right, so we have a web server working, and it's Django 5. Okay, so now let's start adding some applications. Okay. And since we want to create essentially we want to create a planner for each week, for each day of the week, right? So that's the essential goal for this introductory Django course. So I am going to create a weekly planner project. And to do that, we say Python manage. Okay, so you don't write there. So now I have to create I can actually stop this, but I'll just, what I do is I normally just create a new terminal. Okay, so and then remember you have to activate your you have to activate your virtual environment. And then we can say Python, that's not showing, Python start manage.py start app, and we're going to call this app weekly planner, right? And just like we saw with the project, there we have our application, right? So this is the project, and this is the application. And you can see we come with a database, right? SQLite, and we can store data. Okay. So now that we have began, let us create our first URL and views. Okay.